so it's really acquiring rights for other stuff, and then there's some transactional elements. There's some. Do you do like the contracts for the production help and
like for a feature film project, it would be involving all the kind of pre-production stuff, lining up all the releases, securing the talent, negotiating with the talent's agent.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going out of order, but acquiring the screenplay, optioning the life story rights if you're basing it on a life story. And so there are lots of moving pieces in that. When I mentioned that I'm working with CMJ Productions, what they do is each time they get approved for a new television series, and we just got a new one today. They just keep cranking them out. When they do that, then we have an initial phone call, and I review the treatment, and we talk about whether we see any kind of issues that are going to be problematic as we develop the series.
Okay.
The one we got today, I haven't had a chance to look at the treatment, but it's about food, and it's about some of the strange ways that people create food. And so, I'm already thinking, what kind of issues might come up in this? Like, are we recipes that we're going to be dealing with, or, what other things that come up? When it was the celebrity series, the celebrity estates, it was a lot of questions about publicity rights. What kind of things are we going to encounter there? And we certainly did.
Sure.
We do a lot of real crime reenactment shows, and there's issues about privacy rights in there as well. So, or, I can talk about a lot of interesting specifics right now. But yeah, we run into all sorts of crazy issues, and it's kind of a daily thing. But so first the initial phone call to talk about the treatment, what issues we might foresee. Then when they're in production, I'm being contacted and asked a whole variety of stuff. We're trying to get rights to this, but what happens if we can't get rights to it? We want to use, these things. And so there's kind of this vetting process that goes along with that. And I've given you a number of handouts that kind of address some of this. One is the expectations of the E&O insurance, the errors and omissions insurance, about what things that you should be looking at when you're clearing rights in a documentary. And all this is really driven by the insurance company and what their expectations are. Then the other handout is some advice to attorneys about drafting fair use opinions, and we can get into that.
Yeah.
And then the final one is what I thought was a really interesting article that when I came across and read it not too long ago, I said, hey, this is what I do. I didn't know anyone did this, but John is writing about the process of clearing rights in documentary film, and it really is it is sort of the process that I've developed in my own practice as well.
Sure. So I'm guessing from what you've described and your interface with the clients before and during production and post-production as well, you get a lot of phone calls at random times. Hey, got a question. Emails come spitting through, and there's a lot of little things that you need to oversee. Right? Is that basically how
That's right. And one of the key things with this, it's very fast paced. Feature film is kind of this long, slow process that can take years and years. Whereas in this kind of documentary film, that they got to crank these things out, and so it's about responding really quickly. It's almost like being in a newsroom in the sense that you got to jump, the minute the client says, because they're in production, they're trying to get things done, they need answers right away.
Sure.
So
I'm trying to figure out how you charge for all of this. It's a lot of work that just kind of comes shotgunning in, and so you've got to figure out a good.
I charge a lot.
That's
how you charge.
Right. Do you figure out like an hourly fee agreement, or it's probably based on budget, or they've got a budget that?
I almost exclusively work out on the hourly basis.
Okay.
All right. When you're dealing with a smaller client and there's a lot of sensitivity about costs, I usually try to assure them that I may give them a ballpark figure and say I won't exceed this or things like that. But with this, bigger types of productions, it's just the clock is running. And so, I just keep track of my time. Back to this process of vetting or clearing the rights in the documentary. So once the episode is finished, then it's sent to me, and my kids tell their friends that I watch TV for a living, because my job actually is to screen those episodes, and they usually have a list of time codes of issues that they want me to look at. And so I'll watch each episode of each series at least once, sometimes twice, 3 times. I've watched one program 10 times now, one episode. And taking notes, sort of answering their questions about various issues, and most of them involve the question of fair use. They've attempted to get permission to use some material, but they either haven't been able to get a hold of the owner, they can't figure out who the owner is, or the owner is demanding some ridiculous amount of money, or is just refusing to give them permission for some other reason, like the Bob Marley estate.
Sure.
And so at that point, the question is, what do we do? Can we rely on fair use as a sort of backstop? So in the article that I handed out to you, John actually cites something called the Documentary Filmmakers Statement of Best Practices in Fair Use. And if you're not aware of it, you should really check it out, because it's now 20 years old. But it was a project by a couple of professors from American University that tried to set out some examples of what would clearly fall within fair use. And they have 4 examples, one of which deals with criticism. So if you're critiquing a work, say a scholarly article critiquing a work of art, for example, that would, under the parameters, and it's fairly detailed, but under the parameters of the statement, that would fall under fair use. The other one is a cultural commentary, would likely be fair use. Using something to illustrate a historic sequence is very often fair use. And that's the example that I always seem to end up relying on, is that my clients are taking images and film footage and stuff to use in telling a story, a historic, recounting a historic story. And in doing that, they sort of need to show like what the murder victim looked like, or where they lived, and things like that. So images that are in the context of a historical sequence, very often I can say will qualify for fair use. But it's something you have to look at each use individually. Each thing is a separate analysis to see whether it falls under fair use. And I actually had a question from the discovery attorney the other day. She said, did you ever not say they could use something? Because there is a tendency to kind of say, well, everything's fair use. But I actually have. I've encountered some interesting situations where I've said to my client, no, you've got to figure out some way around this.
Yeah.
You can't rely on fair use for this. So
exactly.
Anyway, there are always fascinating issues that we encounter. So at the end of this process, what we're really trying to do is satisfy the E&O insurance carrier, and they're asking, are you relying on fair use for any of this material? And like I say, I screen the final episodes, and there's this list of time codes, and I've developed kind of a shorthand for responding to these, where I sort of reference how the context in which the work is used, and whether I think it qualifies for fair use, whether the amount was reasonable, whether there's a substitute, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And then I reference this statement of best practices in fair use and say, example 4. And it's a shorthand that we've developed to do this, and the insurance carriers buy off on it. And in the end of the process, we actually have a spreadsheet for each piece of material that's a clearance log. And each thing that's listed there will have, if it's fair use, if we're relying on fair use, there'll be a notation with my little shorthand summary at the end of it, so that when it goes to the E&O carrier and to Discovery Channel, they'll just look at this list and they can go down and they can kind of sign off whether they think that's reasonable or not.
Okay.
And usually they're, as long as there's an attorney vetting this whole thing, that's what they're looking for.
They're looking for a clean legal bill of health for all the assets that are coming in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To the film.
And occasionally I'll get a Discovery attorney calling me and saying, "Can you explain why you did this?"